I don't think there's anything in there, though, that authorizes you to do exactly what you're doing here.
Senator, I know that's really important to you. I know it's really important.
Yeah, it's really important, and we got zero word, zero, nothing. Workload, give me a break. You've been working on this for 10 years.
This, by the way, you were talking about the shortage of your manpower. You put out this 832-page environmental impact statement that's nothing but drivel. In the statement, you know what I can't find? Anybody who supports this from Idaho. Can you name anybody or any entity that wants this?
Senator, the anger that you're talking about is of concern to me on the ground. I'm not going to rise to the rhetoric and name names.
You ought to be ashamed. The administration ought to be ashamed. The Secretary of Interior ought to be ashamed.
It goes on, I would be more than willing to pay you $1 for the sale, but you'd have to find me first, and that could be your worst nightmare. P.S. You bastards go in there anyway, and a lot of people could get hurt. Why'd you send this? You lied to us blatantly, and you know it.
I believe that we're going to need it through a transition to a clean energy economy.
You should go talk to the Germans about that vision, see how that's working out for them.
There's a statement in there by the investigator that says Stone-Manning, quote, was an active member of the original group that planned the spiking.
Conservation and landscape health rule that you recently finalized elevates non-use either on par with or arguably above multiple use. Now, according to FLPMA, BLM is required to manage for multiple use and for sustained yield, with multiple use referring to things like grazing, timber harvesting, energy, mining, and recreation. Can you cite a provision of FLPMA that allows for you to depart from that standard and to prioritize non-use instead of multiple use and sustained yield? What provision of FLPMA allows you to do that?
Title I, Section 103 is where the multiple use definition occurs in FLPMA, and it is very explicitly clear that managing for fish and wildlife habitat, managing for natural and scenic values, those are direct words from FLPMA, is our responsibility. And
yeah, look, I understand that, and this as part of the sort of the recreation portfolio, and you've got the ability to do that. I don't think there's anything in there though that authorizes you to do exactly what you're doing here.
I want to know who canceled BLM's commitment to move forward on the state of Alaska's compromise on PLO 5150, and if it wasn't you, who was it?
Senator, I know that's really important to you. I know it's really important.
Yeah, it's really important, and we got zero word, zero, nothing. Is it happening?
I wouldn't call it canceled.
Okay, what would you call it?
My conversation with the commissioner last week was about how we're up against some timing issues and some workload issues throughout the department.
What does that mean?
And our plates are full, and that we're not moving forward with the EA in the timeline that we had originally
I don't
discussed.
understand what you have just said. Is the project canceled?
No.
Is the project delayed?
The EA is, I guess delay is the right.
Is the project delayed for the duration of this administration, or are you continuing to work on it? Is it dead as far as your office is concerned?
Senator, no, it is not dead as far as my office is concerned.
Then what's happening?
As I was saying, our plates are full. I like to make sure that we get things done and
Who made this decision?
Done well.
Who made the decision?
It was a collective decision about workload, which I always
was it you? Was it someone at the department, or was it out of the White House itself?
It was a collective decision about workload with the department.
With the department, so the White House wasn't directing this.
Not that I know of.
Okay, I'm actually just stunned with your response here today. You knew we were going to have an opportunity to discuss this, and the fact that you can't give me really a straight answer as to where you are. Workload, give me a break. You've been working on this for 10 years.
We're going to talk today about the Lava Ridge project. You're familiar with it?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. I represent 1.8 million angry people, angry at you personally. And it isn't just the people of Idaho. We've got the legislature voted unanimously, House and Senate, objecting to this project, saying don't do it. We have the 7 Idaho counties that are affected unanimously adopting a resolution of disapproval, saying don't do it. Your own BLM Resource Advisory Council voted unanimously not to do this and said don't do this. The Shoshone-Bannock tribe submitted 2 comment letters in opposition to this project. The Friends of Minidoka Pilgrimage Planning Committee, and Japanese American Citizen League, who operate the sacred ground in there where they had a Japanese internment camp in World War II, said, don't do this. We don't want this. We are angry about this. And I want to put this anger for you into perspective that you will understand. You remember previously your foray with Idaho was engagement in a conspiracy to spike trees in the national forest in Idaho. You recall that after you did that, the people that were charged, that you testified against in return for an immunity agreement, went to prison over it. Idahoans were angry. They were angry with those people. They were angry with you. Now they're seeing the same thing out of you because none of them want the debauchement of this 100,000 acres with these 660-foot towers on it. So, do you understand how angry we are about this?
Senator, I can hear the anger in your voice, and I know that change is difficult. This wind proposal is big, but what we did do with your constituents was listen very hard, and the proposal now...
No, you didn't.
The proposal now is halved, and yet it will still provide energy for up to 500,000 homes, almost a gigawatt of power.
Where are those homes located? I'll tell you, California. You know that. You think that makes us happy? Why don't you put this project in California? If they need the energy so bad, do it down there. We don't want this project in Idaho. So I have a question for you. You did this, by the way, you were talking about the shortage of your manpower. You put out this 832-page environmental impact statement that's nothing but drivel. In this statement, you know what I can't find? Anybody who supports this from Idaho. Can you name somebody or some entity in Idaho that supports this project?
Senator, I have seen a couple hundred comments in support from
compared to how many opposed?
I don't know the vote count.
I'll help you out.
Yeah.
It's in the tens of thousands. Nobody wants this. Nobody wants this. Can you name anybody or any entity that wants this?
Senator, the anger that you're talking about is of concern to me on the ground. I'm not going to rise to the rhetoric and name names.
So what are we going to do about this? With all the opposition from Idaho and us getting no benefit out of this whatsoever, what are we going to do about this? That you just set that aside and proceed on? Who wants this? Who is it that's pursuing this? Is it you?
Senator, we responded to an application from a company to develop public lands. It's what we do every day.
So it is a company that came forward and you're responding to them and ignoring 1.8 million people plus the entire establishment of our government in the state of Idaho. You're ignoring that for the company that came in and said, oh, here, we want to debauch 100,000 acres and put 241 windmills up on this land. That's how you're going to proceed.
Senator, the final EIS does call for that. The original proposal called for 400 turbines, and we listened to your constituents. We listened to...
You didn't hear any constituents say cut the 400 in half. Every constituent said, don't do this. So you didn't listen.
Senator, I hear the frustration and anger in your voice. We have issued the final environmental impact statement. It, of course, is not the final decision. That comes at the record of decision phase.
You know, I warned everyone when your confirmation was up, if you had someone who had such disrespect for the natural resources of America, for our country, and for my state, Idaho, this is what we were going to see. You ought to be ashamed. The administration ought to be ashamed. The Secretary of Interior ought to be ashamed. This is awful, awful, awful management of our public lands. It's not multiple use, it's abuse of our public lands.
Would you agree, though, for example, if you were the owner of whatever property rights and the federal government was preventing you from utilizing those in full compliance with the law, that would be an unfair taking?
Senator, I am not an attorney, but what I do know
But
is...
then just on the common sense and just common sense fairness. So, I mean, it's your neighbor. You restrict your neighbor from the use of his property arbitrarily. Is that a fair or a reasonable thing to do? Just in general.
Yeah, Senator, I hear your frustration. What we try to do is balance the laws and the objectives of the administration.
But the laws require multiple use on these federal lands. So whether it's this resource management plan or your recent April 18th rule regarding public lands, where you are now putting in place restoration or mitigation leases, okay, which lock away the ability for multiple use. Once you've put these mitigation leases in place, and we don't even know for how long, now that's limited to one use. That violates the law of multiple use. So on the one hand, you've got an unreasonable taking, and second, you're in violation of the law that requires multiple use. How can you go down that track and say that you're either being fair to people or complying with the law? You're doing this through executive fiat. You're not adhering to some new law. There was no law passed that suddenly said you can abrogate all fairness and former laws or laws on the books. There's nothing that says that. You just through executive fiat are blowing right by the absolute requirements of the law.
Senator, with respect, mitigation leases won't be single use.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Tell me about that. So you're going to allow farming, you're going to allow energy development, all those things on these mitigation leases?
So
because I'd like to see that in writing, because that'll be great. I want to see that in writing from you.
It is in the rule that there are often overlapping uses in what we do. So, for example, there could be a grazing permittee who's got a grazing lease on a piece of ground. Mitigation company wants to come in and say, hey, I'd like to improve your grass. Can I work with you? Can we put a mitigation lease on this? They come to the BLM and say, we'd like to do a mitigation lease. And so those uses then become compatible. Transmission line across the section, for example, can be compatible with the increased production we're trying to get to through the mitigation.
We'll want those assurances from you in writing, and so we'll want you to come out and explain that to our ranchers and to our energy industry, to our tourism industry. We truly do have multiple use in compliance with the law, which benefits everybody, and we're going to want your commitment that that can continue.
It is exactly what the rule envisions.
What's tree spiking, Director?
Senator, again, this committee engaged quite a bit.
No, that's a factual question. Do you know what it is?
And I do. It is.
You want to tell us? Go ahead.
Yeah, it's when people illegally put metal objects into trees so that they prevent a timber sale.
What happens if a chainsaw hits a spike?
Sometimes when a chainsaw hits a spike, it can buck the saw.
Yeah, violently recoil, potentially kill or seriously maim the loggers.
Yeah, which is why I notified the federal authorities that I had heard that happened.
Loggers like, for instance, George Alexander, this is from an article on the Washington Post explaining what happens when trees get spiked. Loggers who are blue-collar workers, by the way, these are not wealthy people. These are not people who have had the advantages perhaps you and others have had. People like George Alexander, who, for example, in May 1987, at age 23, his chainsaw hit a tree spike. I'm quoting, his face was slashed from eye to chin, his teeth were smashed, his jaw was cut in half. That's a typical reaction when a logger hits a spike. Now, you just said, I think just a second ago, that you were involved. There were 2 people convicted in 1989 of putting 500 pounds of spikes in an Idaho forest. Senator Rich mentioned this just a moment ago. You testified you sent a letter to the Forest Service on their behalf. I have it here. The letter says, among other things, this letter sent to notify you that the post office sale, that's the forest sale in Idaho, has been spiked heavily. The reason for this action is that this piece of land is very special to the earth. It is home to the elk, deer, mountain lions, birds, and especially the trees. It goes on, I would be more than willing to pay you $1 for the sale, but you'd have to find me first, and that could be your worst nightmare. P.S. You bastards go in there anyway, and a lot of people could get hurt. Why'd you send this?
Senator, as I said at the time, over 30 years ago, a really angry and turns out violent person handed me that letter and said, will you send this to the Forest Service?
And you did. Why?
What you just talked about in 1987 to a logger, this is 1988, 9. I understood that people could get hurt.
Why didn't you notify the federal authorities? Why did you send this threatening letter on behalf of these two men who were convicted of crimes?
I was terrified of them and wanted no involvement with them.
So you wanted no involvement, but you sent a letter that says you bastards go in there anyway and a lot of people could get hurt? Why didn't you just contact the FBI or anybody, any local authority?
Because the person who did this act threatened people's lives if they disclosed who did it.
Yeah, in fact, you were investigated for being involved, weren't you? Here we have a letter sent to this committee from the special agent of the USDA Forest Service, Michael Merkley, who was in charge of the investigation. He says, and he details this in the letter to this committee, that he investigated you for your involvement. He says, and I'm going to quote now, grand jury subpoenas were issued for hair samples, handwriting exemplars, fingerprints. These subpoenas were served on persons suspected of being involved, having knowledge of the incident, including Ms. Tracy Stone-Manning. You've testified you were never investigated, ever for anything. Why'd you lie to this committee?
Senator, this committee delved deeply, went into the court records where I testified against these men.
Were you issued subpoenas?
No.
You were not issued subpoenas?
I was issued a subpoena to appear before a grand jury.
Really? Because here's what he says. Ms. Stone-Manning was extremely difficult to work with. She was antagonistic. She was uncooperative, refused to provide her hair, handwriting exemplars, and fingerprints as ordered by the grand jury. It was not until after we informed her she would be arrested if she did not comply with the subpoenas that she provided the samples to me. So you were subpoenaed.
Senator Hawley,
you were the target of an investigation.
Do you have a question?
You were the target of an investigation. You lied to this committee. Why?
Senator, I never received a target letter. I'm curious, I understand why this committee jumped over 30 years of my career in considering my nomination and went to a salacious moment from graduate school where I tried to protect people. What I don't understand is why we're not looking at the last 3.5 years now.
Here's why.
Senator
It's because people are killed in these kind of incidents. It is an act of terrorism.
Your time is expired.
A special agent in charge found that you were involved. You lied to this committee in saying that you were never investigated.
Senator
you were never
Hawley,
the target of investigation. In fact, you were.
Your time
you lied to us
is
blatantly,
expired.
and you know it.
What reasoning, besides simply being opposed to coal, does the BLM have for closing leasing on America's largest coal field?
Senator, the President has asked us to transition to a clean energy economy, free of carbon pollution by 2035, and economy-wide by 2050. Lands leased in the Miles City field office are leased through...
Do you agree with the President's goal on that? Is that the right goal?
I do.
So you think we should shut down oil and gas and coal?
I think we're at record production.
Should we shut down... you just told me you're trying to go to zero. Do you believe we should shut down oil, gas, and coal production in the United States?
I believe that we should become energy secure through...
You're not answering my question. You just said you want to go to zero carbon. If you agree with the Biden administration's objective and vision, I'm asking you, do you think we should shut down oil, gas, and coal?
If you can let me finish my sentence, I would say to you, I believe that we need to transition to a clean energy economy built on renewable energy, which will keep this country secure.
Okay, that's green speak. We just answer the question. Does that mean, by getting to that we shut down oil, gas, and coal?
We're going to use oil and gas and coal for decades through the transition, but ultimately...
But do you believe we should ultimately shut it down?
We need it through the transition.
But you believe we should shut it down?
I believe that we're going to need it through a transition to a clean energy economy.
You should go talk to the Germans about that vision, see how that's working out for them.
Bureau has yet to issue leases to the winning bidders of the December 2020 oil and gas leases. So it's now 2024, 2020 to 2024. When do you plan to issue the leases?
Senator, thank you for that question. We are still working our way through multiple court decisions. When we issue them, we want them to be durable and stick.
Because, you know, the law requires you issue the leases within 60 days, and it's now been over 3.5 years. So when do you plan, you know, give me a date, when you plan to issue these leases that by law should have been released?
Senator, I don't have a date for you at this time.
I guess I can see you're a little aggravated that we're after you for something that happened quite some time ago. But I want you to know that that ecoterrorism is so bad that when someone commits that, they certainly ought to be disqualified from management of public resources. That's why we're angry about this. Now, Senator Hawley wasn't here, but I was here when you had your hearing. And you didn't tell us anything about that. You swore that you had never been investigated. And you knew better than that. In fact, you had an attorney. That attorney negotiated an immunity agreement so that you wouldn't go to prison. Isn't that true? Yeah, it's a yes or no, ma'am.
Senator, I never received a letter saying I was under investigation. That was the question. There
was never a question about whether you received a letter that you were under investigation. The question that was asked to you was, have you ever been under investigation? And you knew you were under investigation. We were never able to cross-examine you on this. And as a matter of fact, after that, when it came to light, we started sending letters asking questions about it, and you wouldn't answer those letters. And you wound up getting confirmed on a party line vote, of course.
Senator, all of this came out also in my Senate confirmation at the state of Montana, where we went into great depth about...
Don't know anything about the state of Montana. I'm talking about sitting right here looking like this where you were trying to become the head of the Bureau of Land Management. Let me say something else that really troubles me, is the lack of remorse of your involvement in this. You're saying, oh, I was handed a letter and I had to send it because I was scared. The investigation had things very different than that. There's a statement in there by the investigator that says Stone-Manning, quote, was an active member of the original group that planned the spiking. There is a quote in here from a witness who overheard you. She said that she had overheard in a conversation where Ms. Stone-Manning, along with other co-conspirators, planned the tree spiking and discussed whether to use the ceramic or metal spikes in the trees. We all know how important that is, whether you use metal or ceramic. Lastly, the ringleader of the whole thing, Mr. Blunt, said after your hearing, and you said, oh, well, you know, I didn't know anything about this till he handed me the letter. He said, this is the ringleader of your conspiracy, said, quote, she knew about it far in advance, a couple of months before. So your lack of remorse here is despicable, to be honest with you.
Senator, I have to say for the record, none of what you just said is true.
Well, somebody sure thought it was.
Did
you sign an immunity agreement?
I actually couldn't tell you the difference between a ceramic and a metal spike. I actually don't know the difference.
Well, the difference, as you know, is when they go through the mill, they're x-rayed, and if there's metal in it, they'll be able to kick it out. If you put a ceramic spike in, they'll never pick it up, and it'll kill mill workers. That's the difference between ceramic and metal, and they overheard you having this conversation with someone else. Look, I can't tell you how deeply disappointed I am, not only in what you've done. You wanted us to look at the last 3.5 years. The last 3.5 years has been a disgrace, as you've heard here today.
And this committee stands adjourned.